Well, hello, everybody. Welcome again to the Kendal at Home Brain Health Series. I'm Jennifer Brush, and I'm very happy for you to join us today. We also have a guest with us, Katie Norris, and I'll introduce her in just a minute. For those of you who haven't met me yet, if you're new to the Brain Health Series, I am Kendal at Home support person for all things related to dementia. I work with members who have cognitive impairment. I can complete cognitive evaluations, help you to develop plans to be able to stay in the home longer and more independently and to be able to engage in life better. I'm a researcher in the area of dementia. I'm also a speech language pathologist and author. And a Fulbright specialist. I've authored or co-authored several books in the area of dementia, and one of them is Creative Connections in Dementia Care that I co-authored with my good friend and colleague, Katie Norris, who's joining us today. She'll be talking about different aspects of brain health. Katie and I have worked together. She's worked for my company, Brush Development. She's also served on the board at Kendal at Home. And she is a Unitarian minister, a dementia coach and dementia specialist, a font of knowledge when it comes to issues related to mental fitness, mental health, and brain health. So she'll be with us for the next two series, and I'm excited for all of you to learn from her. One thing that's really important that Katie does is that she recognizes how important nutrition and movement are in relation to brain health. And so she's going to be doing some movement with you today. And when we're ready for that, I really encourage all of you to please turn on your cameras to be available, to let her interact with you, for her to be able to see you and give you some feedback instead of having just straight up lecture today. And before I turn it over to Katie, I just wanted to share with you some, we try and talk about things that are new in research that's going on that's related to brain health. And I just have a few new studies that I read about that I am going to share with you today. It's not research that I've done, but it is research that you might be interested in. So first of all, coming out of the Georgia Institute of Technology, some interesting research on flickering light. So the promise of flickering light to treat disease takes another step forward in this new study. And it's looking at 40 hertz stimulus of light, flickering light, triggering a release of chemical signals in the brain. So let's take a look at this just a little closer here. The researchers found that healthy brains feature brain waves or rhythms that oscillate at roughly 40 hertz. And we know, we've talked about this before in our brain health series, that people with dementia, with Alzheimer's disease in specific, have this buildup of amyloid plaques in the brain, okay? And we know that this buildup of plaque disrupts healthy brain rhythm. So 40 hertz flickering light shined into the eye mimicked and induced healthy gamma rhythm in the brain. The study this light treatment given 1 hour a day for 6 weeks had dramatic positive effects on brain function, leading to 40 to 50% reduction in amyloid plaques in the hippocampus. So I think that's really interesting. If we can look at more and more alternative treatments that don't involve medication with side effects that can help the brain function better, I think it's fantastic. So I'm interested to learn more about this, to read more of the studies. There's products now. I'm not suggesting that you go out and buy anything, but I'm suggesting that we learn more about this, that perhaps this is something that can really help our life, all of us. not just people with Alzheimer's disease. Other studies looking at movement and exercise, which is important. And Kate, we've talked about it. Kate will talk about it today too. So we know that studies have shown that regular aerobic exercise affects the hippocampus. It affects the neurotransmitters. Some of the research is showing that people who exercise on a regular basis may have the brain of a younger person. Okay, making it easier for them to continue learning and maintain mental fitness for many years longer than people who do not exercise. We also know that what we eat matters. We've talked about this. Katie's going to talk about this also. Some new research showing that low carb, high fat diet may stabilize brain networks that degrade with aging. There's been some research that has looked at brain scans of over 1,000 people and found that our brain actually begins to destabilize around the age of 47, which is young, right? And that normally reliant on glucose, the brain can also use compounds called ketones generated by the breakdown of dietary fat. So in this study, just in 1 week, high fat, low carb keto diets increased brain activity and stabilized brain network. So there are researchers that are saying a low carb diet could prevent or even reverse damage to the brain, okay? Because they found that through the brain scans that they did, that glucose decreased the stability of the brain's network, while ketones produced in the liver during periods of carbohydrate restrictive diets made the networks more stable. Now, this is controversial. So people who've done this research feel that it could provide the brain with greater levels of energy, that this is something that's really important. Other researchers are saying these diets have their own risks, that people that eat these types of diets eat higher levels of fat, which often means that they're not eating as many fruits and vegetables as they could be eating, and that it could have detrimental impact on the heart, which certainly has serious side effects. So I'm not suggesting either diet. I'm just letting you know some of the things that are out there and that we need to learn more about it. And I'm interested to hear what Katie has to say. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn it over to you, Katie. Welcome, and please, tell our group more about yourself. And again, I encourage everybody during opportunities to interact that we all do so today. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Hey, everyone. I'm Katie Norris, and I don't know if I moved from Ohio, away from Ohio about 7 years ago. So I might still know some of you that are on the call or not from my time on the board at Kendal at Home. But yeah, I've been working with Jennifer for a long time now on different projects relating to dementia, and she's my go-to research person and has done a huge amount of study in dementia care and how to help people live well. And so I first met Jennifer when we were taking care of my mom who had Lewy body dementia. And this is kind of how I got into all of the brain health stuff. I could literally talk about brains all day. I find them amazing and fun. So, but I started just looking at dementia care and how we can help someone live better. But at the same time, I had some mental and cognitive issues that were going on. And my husband was really sick as well, and we could not figure out what was wrong. And as I was doing research about dementia care and a little bit about decreasing, like delaying the onset of dementia and living a more brain healthy life as early as possible. I found a lot of the interventions that they suggested helped me and my family feel a lot better and resolve a lot of the issues that we were having. So I think sometimes the universe or whatever shows us in like this one big moment what we're supposed to be working on. And I feel like sharing stuff about brain health is what I am supposed to do right now, because I'm hoping it helps a lot of people. And when we think about brain health, people usually ask me either about dementia and how to prevent it. And they ask me about training your brain, like with video games and things like that. And brain health is very, very vast. And when I talk about that, it can be a little bit, people are surprised at how much your brain health affects everything in your life and how the rest of your health affects your brain. So we will talk about diet and movement today. And then next month, we'll talk about a few of the other areas like environment and sleep. It's interesting to see how many things affect how our brain works and the small things that we can do every day to improve our brain health. So I'm going to share my screen with you all. Hopefully I can do this right. Let's try it. All right. Okay. So let me know if you can see this, or if Jennifer wants to let me know, or someone wants to do I believe there's a way to do a thumbs up thing or something like that, but
Yes, we can see it.
great. Okay. So we're going to be talking about optimizing your brain today. Yay. Little bit about me. I fell down a rabbit hole of going through and getting a whole bunch of certifications and lots of different things that have to do with the brain, basically, is what all of that means. And a lot of it is also related to movement, because when I was on the board at Kendal and everything, we also talked a lot about things like gait assessments and movement, and that being a predictor of longevity. And so I got really interested in how do we help people move well throughout their whole lifespan so that people can function better as we age. So I am the co-author with Jennifer on Creative Connections in Dementia Care, and I'm also featured in a book called The Joy of Movement by Dr. Kelly McGonigal. And I'm a Unitarian Universalist community minister now. So that means this is what I do for my ministry. So my little thing is right there. We go. Okay. Sometimes Zoom puts the faces right over my text for myself. All right, so the goal is to talk about simple steps to optimize brain health, and in 4 categories: diet, movement, sleep, and environment. And the small changes that we can make in these areas to improve cognition and memory, general brain function, but also decrease anxiety, overwhelm, depression, so mental health as well as cognitive health. So I kind of like to say there's a lot of keys to brain health, but if you chunked them into categories, it would be decrease inflammation, increase and support the neural connections, and neuroplasticity, which is our brain's ability to change and rewire itself and create new neural connections. So the simplest example of that is sometimes someone who has a stroke where one part of their brain has been damaged, another part might take over and be able to do some of the same functions. And also how to calm the nervous system. And that relates a lot to feelings of anxiousness and overwhelm throughout the day. And so between this month and next, we'll focus on some ways to access these 3 keys. All right, so first I'm going to talk about diet. And Jennifer, thank you so much for your introduction to that. I do typically work with people who have more cognitive and mental health issues than on average. And so when I talk about diet, I am, often working with people that definitely need a little bit more dietary intervention than somebody else who's kind of just functioning totally fine would be. But I do like to share this information for everybody because there are some general principles that are helpful to our mental, like our emotional health and our cognitive health. And part of that is talking about inflammation, foods that can cause inflammation in the body and in the brain. We'll go over that in a few minutes. You know, not everybody is sensitive to these foods. I think one of the interesting things is that a lot of times I just get people who say their life is kind of out of, not out of control. They would just like their life to be better. Things feel overwhelming. They've got, aches and pains and just kind of having brain fog. And, people say that they have senior moments and are forgetting things, but that they don't have any problems with any of the foods that they eat, and they're not reacting to anything, except then when we change their diet, a whole bunch of the issues that they're having improve. And I think part of that is because you get really used to living the way that you live. Like I have had stomach problems since I was 6 years old. So as soon as my stomach problems started to go away, I didn't understand what it felt like to not be in pain all the time. Like that actually felt scarier to me than being in pain, because all I was used to was having chronic stomach pain. So we can get really used to the way that we're feeling, and sometimes notice that we feel a little bit better with a little bit of a different diet. So there's two things with diet, the inflammatory foods, but also an issue with insulin resistance. And that's a little bit what Jennifer was talking about, some of the research coming out behind ketogenic diets or low carb diets. And I'll talk a little bit about what insulin resistance is in a minute, but now Alzheimer's is sometimes commonly called type 3 diabetes because of this relationship with insulin resistance that they're finding. And not in everybody, but is a factor for a lot of people. Anti-inflammatory diets have been found to be neuroprotective, so protective of the brain. And amyloid they're finding a response to inflammation. So the less inflammation that we have means less amyloid in the brain. Now there is, amyloid can be produced at all ages. It's different in different people, kind of depends on your genetics. A lot of times it's just cleared out during sleep. And it's really the buildup of amyloid that becomes a problem. And so we don't want too much inflammation, because then the brain has a very hard time clearing amyloid. So this is, I'll tell you the text so you don't have to just read everything. This is my little graphic for you. We're going to talk about two different parts, the brain on fire and the body on fire. So the problem with inflammation in both areas. So basically, the simplest way to put this is, if you happen to be sensitive to common inflammatory foods, it can send inflammation to the rest of the body, normally by weakening the cells in your gut lining. And that's what protects us from having any kind of like toxins or different things that are, in our food, or actually grains and things like that have a small amount of a little bit of toxic coating. That's how they get passed from animal to animal and get planted in the ground so that they're protected. In humans, it's usually not very much because we are not as affected by it, but some people are very affected by some of those small amount of toxins, or they just happen to eat a lot of them. And it's just a bit of an overload. Some people might have some lactose intolerance, or can't handle the casein in dairy. So there's a lot of different foods that could be inflammatory. And if they are to a person and do bother your system, it can create poor gut microbiome, and 70% of our neurotransmitters are produced in our gut. So it does matter if our gut is doing well. So that's why I do see a lot of people, there's a lot of good research with people who have mental health issues also have stomach issues as well. And so we want to decrease the amount of inflammation in the brain. And so a lot of people do modify their diet a little bit and really take care of their gut health in order to decrease the inflammation to the brain. You'll see things like, Alzheimer's and other dementias. That's much farther down the line, but just trouble with learning, memory, brain fog, having some confusion, having a hard time moving your body correctly, and gait changes actually can be part of this. And we're seeing gait changes early before people are diagnosed with dementia. It can be an early sign. And also, they do use a ketogenic diet for people with, there's some great research coming out now for people with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, and other mental health disorders, because they find that the different fuel source for the brain and also the decreased inflammation can help them function better as well. And you may know that a keto diet is used for epilepsy also. So this is a little bit about the body and inflammation. This can happen from foods, same as before in the other slide. Just as those inflammation go to the brain, it can go to the rest of your body. So sometimes people stop having joint pain when they change their diet a little bit, but you could also over-exercise. The way that we sit can even cause inflammation if we're always kind of in a position that's stressful on our body, even if we're not moving. That can cause inflammation. Poor sleep just increases inflammation, because then our when we sleep is one of the times when the body and brain clears inflammation. So all that is to say, there's two ways that I tell people are good to think about after talking with your doctor about optimizing your diet if you want to do that. One is to decrease the carbohydrates a little bit. So, and that's because of insulin resistance, which is a metabolic disorder where your cells become insulin resistant. So that just means that they can't use the glucose for energy. It shuts off the receptors to be able to use insulin. And then we're not getting enough, but also then there's also too much in our body at the same time. Our bodies are very interesting, what they do when it gets out of balance. And so this happens when we eat more carbohydrates than our body needs. And most Americans do eat this way, not all. And it really depends on the person. Some people do well on a higher carbohydrate diet than others. So this is why you should always, talk with your doctor and everything, and also see how you feel with what you're eating. So the studies have shown that resolving insulin resistance can lead to memory and cognitive improvements. The plasticity of your brain is regulated by hormones, and one of those hormones is insulin. So you do want that to be in check. Insulin resistance is also, they're finding, associated with depression. And as insulin resistance increases, so glucose levels are too high, this would be what, if you've ever been diagnosed as pre-diabetic, is common, is also insulin resistance, but you can kind of notice the stuff even before then. But when insulin resistance increases, the inflammatory markers in the blood increase. So that indicates systemic inflammation, which could be in the body and the brain. So what I usually tell people, if you want to do this after talking with a doctor, is to keep your carbohydrate foods intake to about 1/4 cup per serving per meal if you're eating 3 meals a day. So people always ask me what this is, and that would be breads, pasta, corn, all types of potatoes, cakes, cookies, pop, juice, most coffee drinks, alcohol, cereal, oatmeal. And I know that sounds like a lot of things. So you could just think about it as just kind of decreasing a little bit of what you have at each meal and leave it at that. You don't need to go overboard. You'll notice if you are eating probably too high carbohydrates and it's not doing well for your body, if you get hangry, that hungry, angry, and you get hungry every couple hours. And that would be, then you'd want to, kind of get stuff checked out with your doctor and everything and see if changing your carbohydrate intake would be helpful. And Jennifer made a great point. The problem with the keto diets is people don't do them with a doctor, or nutritionists. They're not followed super well, and people end up eating a lot of like cheese and meat and not eating vegetables. And you really need a lot of vegetables to get all of your micronutrients. And I really like the Dr. Wall's protocol. And she basically says, if you can do it, eat 9 cups of highly colored vegetables a day. One day I hope to get there. But if you cut like highly colored means the inside is colored. So if you cut an apple in half. It's not actually very nutrient dense, even though it's red on the outside. But a sweet potato, which is orange on the inside, is far more nutrient dense with micronutrients than a white potato. So that's kind of a good way to look at it. And then the other thing you could try is to decrease inflammatory foods. And the most commonly inflammatory are a lot of the grains like wheat, corn, oats go back and forth for some people, depends. Legumes, that's why there's a song about beans kind of causing problems. Although that also depends on how they're cooked. The way that they're cooked can remove a lot of the inflammatory toxins that bother some people. And dairy. So usually with people that want to kind of try this, the easiest thing to do is just to kind of decrease the amount of the two most inflammatory foods, wheat and dairy, and see if that helps. What's interesting is that most inflammatory foods are also high in carbohydrates. So if you're going to decrease your carbohydrates, you probably are decreasing inflammatory foods, and you kill two birds with one stone. So let's see, we're about a half hour in. I could take questions on the food part a little bit if you want, or we go to the next part and take all the questions at the end. Is there a way that you all think you would like to do this?
Feel free to type in the chat or in the Q&A, and we can check those and
Okay.
forward that to Katie. Anybody have any suggestions?
And if you, let's see.
If anyone has any questions, please either type them in. You can type them into the chat for Katie to answer. We'll give you a minute, so you have a little time to type. But that would be good. And to pause for a minute. We have a question about your thoughts on a vegan diet, Katie.
So I struggle with that, obviously, after what I just told you. There are people that do well on a vegan diet. So I would never tell somebody, if you're doing great, to just change your diet. But at the same time, I haven't, and the kind of the gerontologists that I've kind of worked with about changing diet with food, have not found really great success on a vegan diet in people that are really struggling with their emotional or cognitive health. So that's definitely something, because they end up being very highly inflammatory and high carbohydrate. You can absolutely do them as lower carbohydrate, less inflammatory. It's just more difficult, and there are not vegetable protein does not have all the amino acids that animal protein does. So you would absolutely have to supplement, because we need those for our body to function, and you can't get them if you're not eating meat. So that's my short answer. How do you feel about nightshade vegetables? Oh, I'm very sad. I cannot eat nightshades at this moment in time. Nightshades are things like tomatoes, peppers, so sad. And
eggplant.
Yep.
I can't eat them either.
I know, it's so sad. So that's the thing. Like, some people I can kind of tell, particularly people that have a lot of joint pain, stomach bloating and things. So there's two areas that we look at further that you could talk to a doctor about, which would be nightshades and also high FODMAP foods. FODMAPs are foods that ferment in your stomach. So things which actually end up being high fiber. So if you end up eating a high fiber diet and getting a lot of stomach distress, your body may not have the ability to digest all of that fiber yet, and it's fermenting in your gut. And so like, I right now can't eat onions. There's onions, garlic, there's a lot of artichoke, high FODMAP foods also that can bother some people. And that actually depends on your gut microbiome. So what a lot of times when they're working, so I work with a lot of people that also are working with a functional medicine doctor. And so a lot of times they'll be working on fixing their gut microbiome so that they can start to digest those things. And then we introduce them in later. Some people with nightshades, it can be introduced later and they're okay. And some people not. So it really does depend on the person. It's a very good question. How does a paleo diet compare with keto? Okay, so paleo diet and keto are very similar. Keto, if you're really going to do it for a nutritional intervention. So like for me, I have bipolar disorder and was put on that diet for that. If you're going to be put on it, if you're in something like the Bredesen protocol for dementia, it is very specific, keeping the carbs very low, fat at a certain level, and protein at a certain level. But a good keto diet should cut out inflammatory foods. So typically a good keto diet would not have dairy or grains. So sometimes when you go into stores, I tell people not to buy foods that are labeled keto because keto bread will still have wheat in it. It's just that then they added a whole bunch of fiber to decrease the net carbs. It ends up being very confusing. The fiber then often makes people sick, and then the wheat often is too inflammatory. So a really good nutritional keto diet for a nutritional intervention for a medical issue, which you should do with a doctor, is also low inflammatory like paleo. It's the same thing, but the ratios of fat, carbohydrates, and everything are different. In paleo, you kind of don't need to pay attention, or they say you don't need to pay attention to that. The paleo diet world is changing though a little bit. I'm a primal health coach, which is a paleo diet with Mark Sisson, and they really suggest limiting your carbs to that quarter cup. So you're not eating more than 150 grams of carbs a day. Because most people just don't do well unless you exercise a ton. If you're a triathlete, I would be doing a little bit different. So paleo diet, like I ate a paleo diet first and was eating really, really high carb paleo. And so for my brain and body, that didn't work very well. You can eat a whole bunch of carbs just in sweet potato fries. So that's a little bit of the difference. Foods are similar, but the ratios of your macronutrients are different. So it's more the low carb. I usually tell people, think of it as a low carb or / keto paleo diet is what I typically have people do with the okay from their doctor, if that makes sense. All right. I am familiar with Dr. Hyman's nutritional plan, and so he has the Pegan diet. It's not as strict with the carbs. He does add in a few more grains, some of the interesting stuff in there. He does sometimes talk about how the grains are, processed and everything to decrease some of the toxins and stuff. So his is also a great diet if that seems much more accessible to you, because it still reduces more of the inflammatory foods. And he also has you watch the carbohydrate intake as well. So if you can get in to see him, if you're in Ohio at the clinic, that'd be awesome. He's great. So, and that's kind of what we mean by this stuff is kind of controversial. There's research that's really supportive of some of those interventions, some not. It's very hard to research dietary interventions. I do know the China study. And so that's an interesting one with the Mediterranean diet. So it doesn't tend to be very low carb, and actually it has a lot of grains. And so one of the things that they've been trying to figure out with that study is, those people do tend to live longer and have better cognitive function. They also have a lot of other things in their life, like their exercise, being outside, doing new things, which increases neural connections as well. And while they kind of know a little bit about the ratios, we're not sure which part of their lifestyle. It's actually all parts of their lifestyle that contribute to them functioning better. And so some of the people in the study actually do eat lower carb. What they're finding is that people kind of eat within this whole foods framework in a way that works well for their body. And they have all these other great lifestyle factors that also help promote brain health and body health. And so they're starting to try and do studies to overlay Mediterranean diet versus paleo versus keto versus what they're really finding is everybody's different, which and the more that people can really be in tune with what it feels like for your body and brain to function well, and to work with your diet and lifestyle within that to see what your tolerance is for different things, right? So I do tend to work with people who are very sensitive to inflammatory foods, whereas some other people can eat a Mediterranean diet and those foods really don't bother them, but they're still really brain healthy. And it's very, very nutrient dense because it is also high in all the great vegetables that we talked about before. I feel like I talk really fast. I'm sorry. I get excited about, about diets and brains. All right. Okay, so if you have any other questions. So, okay, that's a good question. I'm a bit confused. Are we talking about these diets if you have health issues or for everybody? So in general, I would say for everybody, a really high carbohydrate diet and processed foods is not good for anybody. And so no matter what you're kind of doing, you want to eat as much nutrient dense food as possible. So whole food, protein, vegetables, so meats, fish, vegetables, healthy fat like butter, olive oil, coconut oil, and limit all the processed stuff. Now, if you just did that, you would already be in a better place health-wise than if you're eating a lot of processed food. Now, a lot of the processed food is the stuff that's all the dairy, wheat, corn, and all that kind of stuff. So if you already switch to a less processed diet, you're going to be eating less of those inflammatory foods. I would, if personally, I would say a general brain healthy diet would just be that you're eating lots of meat, vegetables, healthy fat, and you're not eating a ton of carbohydrates, no matter what form that they're in. So very good question. It does get confusing because the diet might change depending on if you have more health issues or not. But in general, that's a generally brain healthy diet. Okay. All right. So if you do have other questions, you can type them in and I will check them in a little bit as well. And we'll move on a little bit and we're going to talk about movement. Also, thank you for your questions, everybody. That is amazing. All right, I'm going to close my chat box for now. Okay, so we're going to talk about movement and why movement's important. So a lot of times people just talk about movement being important for the brain because it brings blood and oxygen to the brain, helping it function better. And so they focus on just cardio movement in general, but you also want strength because strength training, it still builds the neural connection between your brain and your body, which you want to keep that going. And it helps decrease fall risk because you're building balance and strength. And you also want to have better balance and strength because when we're unstable, that is a large amount of stress on the brain. And so your brain is working, let's say I'm out for a walk with somebody. If my brain is working so hard just to make sure I don't fall, it can become very overwhelmed by everything else in the environment. And we can just get anxious, overwhelmed, tired, and fatigued just because our body isn't moving well. And I talked a little about the gait changes. The way that we walk can be an early indicator of dementia. So when I talk about movement, I'm not just talking about cardio and strength stuff. I'm also talking about proper movement patterns, which almost none of us have ever learned. And that when our body isn't moving properly, it can increase stress in our brain because our brain's trying to keep us safe all day long. And so it can lead to more confusion and fatigue. Movement does increase dopamine, which could decrease a little bit of depression. And then poor balance and trouble walking or moving is often a result of poor brain function. It could also be an issue with your vision, inner ear, poor communication between the neurons of the brain and the rest of your body. So it's actually movement is more connected to brain health and vice versa than people think. So some of the earlier studies are suggesting that We might be seeing gait changes in people with dementia because the amyloid plaques are decreasing the neural connections. We have a map of our body and our brain. And if your neural connections are decreasing, you may not have as much control over the rest of your body. And that's kind of the beginning research of why they think they might be seeing some of these gait changes. So there's a few types of movement. This one, you probably know the low intensity cardiovascular movement. So people probably told you to walk or something for a moderate pace for a half hour, to an hour, 3 times a week. Or do any of the other things. The more different things that you can do, the brain does do better when we challenge it and do new things. So when someone's like, I've been a runner my whole life, then we want to work on, can you cycle sometimes on a bike at the gym, or if you like to go outside, do you know how to swim, and change it up a little bit. The one thing that people kind of forget to tell people, and I always hear this, that they never want to tell older adults, that more vigorous exercise leads to better movement or mood improvement, and then slow exercises, but they're afraid to tell people to move faster. And I have people in my, CrossFit classes who are 80. So I'm, it really just depends on the person, but there's a ton of different ways to do something that gets your heart rate up faster than a moderate walk or something would be. So even if you could just do that for starting off for like 5 minutes and get a little bit of a higher paced movement in a couple times a week, that would be great. And on those days, really notice if, especially with mood improvement and stuff and focus, there's some really great research on Parkinson's and biking, and that you need the bike cadence at 90 beats per minute, which I did this with my mom. We would put her on a tandem bike and we would have to pedal in the front for her because it's actually pretty fast. And that decreases tremors and improves Parkinson's symptoms. So it does, the pace and output does matter with the cardiovascular in terms of different ways it can help the brain. You can also use a seated bike or an arm bike. So this is an arm bike in the picture. And actually there's a great arm bike that we have at home that can also be used reclining in a bed and for your legs in a million different ways that I absolutely love for movement if you're not able to, walk or run and stuff like that. So there's lots of different options. And of course, challenge your brain by doing different cardio options. So with the strength training part, for me, strength training and proper movement form are, I teach them at the same time because you don't want to you don't want to increase weight on anything or add speed, change of direction until your movement form is correct. And most of us didn't even learn how to squat correctly. We're actually going to talk about that in a little bit today. So usually adding in strength training with proper movement form a couple times a week with a good trainer who is educated, and ask them about proper range of motion and mobility for these movements, to know how to properly modify the movement to make it safe for all levels, and also how to know. So like I don't have cartilage in one of my knees because I did squats for like 5 years and nobody noticed that my knee wobbles in and out. I had poor form. So every time my knee would wobble in and out, I'm rubbing the cartilage off. And now I don't have any cartilage in one knee. Totally could have been prevented if I was working with coaches that knew how to check for form and all that kind of stuff. So that's why I'm super picky about it. Because then when you're, as we age, then those lead to things that are even worse. So when people are always like, oh, I'm just getting older and I have all this pain and all these movement problems. It's not inevitable. That's just not it wouldn't be a part of normal aging. If we actually help people move properly, we could prevent a lot of that. So I'm going to talk to you about your foot for a minute. Because this is where I start with everyone, even my children and teen athletes, because shoes change the way that we function. I don't want to spend too much time on this because we are getting short on time, and I wanted to go over some of the actual things that you could do at home to work on some of this stuff. But so you can watch this later and kind of read the slides, but there's a whole bunch of different ways that shoes change our ability to walk, move, squat, sit. Even when I say squat, I mean sitting on a toilet, sitting at your chair, you know, to eat dinner, all the things, getting in and out of your car. Shoes. So we have this map in our brain of our body. Shoes get rid of all of the feeling between our foot and the ground. And so the map eventually fades. It also provides stabilization. And so the ankle doesn't work normally anymore. You can't bend your toes. You need to be able to bend your toes to walk properly. And they confine the foot. So if you see in that picture, the normal shaped shoe on the right actually isn't foot shaped. And it's basically binding your feet and putting, it's also how people get bunions. If you'll notice, if you have bunions, that your foot is probably shoe shaped, improper shoe shaped. But this all matters because obviously we want to be able to walk and move safely, not have falls. This big toe issue is actually a huge issue because it's responsible for 80 to 85% of our stability while walking. And most people I do assessments on can't properly bend their big toe. I like at least 80% of people. And then there's a whole bunch of other issues with shoes. All shoes, unless they're a minimalist shoe, have a heel. So even if they look flat, they're all raised off the ground and they don't allow our foot to, so they pitch our weight forward. They also don't allow our foot to feel the ground. It's a lot of things. So what I talk to people about first is creating an arch in your foot. And so I'm going to turn my camera off for a second and move to another spot where there is more room. So hold on 1 second. And while I'm doing that, if you would like to, if you're good with standing and want to reposition yourself so you can stand up and you're holding on to something, or stay seated in something where your feet touch the ground, that would be great. And this would be a great time to turn on your cameras if you're able to. So while I reposition myself, I'll let you all reposition yourself. Except I left my, what is this called? So that you can hear me, microphone on. So let's see. All right. Can you all still see and hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so this part's a little bit harder because camera angles and all this kind of fun things. But I will show you my feet in a minute. Fortunately, my toenails are still slightly painted. Okay, so you can, I'll show you what I want you to do first. And then people that have their cameras on, you can practice a little bit and you can adjust your camera so I can see you if you want me to check out how you're doing. But the idea with the foot, just creating an arch. So flat feet, typically in almost all people, are not a genetic thing. It's more the shoes we wear and that we have lost our foot arch over time. There are some people that genetically have flat feet for sure. But in most people, we can restore whatever their normal arch is, their range for their arch. And we want to make sure that we can do that because I'll show you one reason why. Okay. Can you all at least see the bottom half of my body? Okay, so right now I do not have an arch in my feet. I'm just standing like I'd probably normally stand and shouldn't stand. If you look at the line between my hips and my feet, it's here and then it goes, do you see my knees go in? Then it goes back. So it's not a straight line. So if I stand with collapsed arches, none of this is in a straight line, which means when I walk and everything, this is why people's knees slightly collapse in and they have little knee tweaks and ankle problems and plantar fasciitis problems at the bottom of their feet, arch pain, okay? So I talk about feet all the time because if you watch when I'm gonna come closer, just so you can see my knees a little bit better. When I create an arch in my foot, you see how my knees slightly come out and this is all a straight line now, right? And it's exhausting because you're squeezing your glutes, your thighs, you're pulling in your core, all these things. It's a lot of work. So when you first do this in the beginning, it can be exhausting. So we want to make sure that our arches are good. And that means that you have 3 points of contact on the floor. So if you look at the little picture, there's your big toe and the ball behind it over to number 2, and then number 3. Where most people feel most of the pressure is actually on the inner arch, and they kind of are falling in or fall way out to the side. And they're not really using their big toe or anything. So the easiest way, it's not the easiest thing to teach, but the way I've found is you always want to stand with your feet underneath your hips. So if there's anything you could change in life, so don't stand like this, like this, like this, or all that kind of stuff. So as often as possible, stand with your feet directly underneath your hips and your toes facing forward. And then if you squeeze your glutes and your thighs, you'll automatically already start to create an arch. And you want to feel the 3 points of contact, your big toe right behind the big toe, the ball of the foot, over to the side, and then your heel. And so what I usually have people do is I say to squeeze everything and then let it go. Squeeze, let it go. This is what you practice all day long. But don't, sometimes when people do this, they squeeze and lock out their knees like this. Your knees should always be nice and soft here. And then I'm going to show you my feet up close, because there's one other thing, a really common, I don't want to say mistake, but thing people do. Okay, so let's see. You can see my feet, yes? If you squeeze too much, you'll do this, where your toes curl under, and we don't ever want that. So also, people who wear flip-flops, your toes need to curl under to keep your flip-flop on. So if you have like hammer toes and stuff, it's usually because of the shoes that you wear. So you don't want to do this. So think of, you're squeezing everything, and it'll feel like you're kind of trying to spread your feet away from each other. Sometimes people say spread peanut butter across the floor. But your little toes, you should be able to wiggle them eventually. So they're just lightly on the ground. But your big toe you can feel on the ground, ball of your foot, and your heel. So if it looks like this, you squeeze too much. So it should look like this, and kind of like you're pushing out to the side. You can do this seated. It's a lot harder. It'll feel really light on your feet because you won't be able to press into the ground as much, but it's still worth doing it seated as well. So if you want to turn on your camera and you want me to check, I can do that. If you want to try it a few times. Did anybody try it and want to tell me if you could feel anything, if you're like, what's happening? It's more difficult than it seems, for sure. Yes.
I absolutely, the tightening the glutes and the thigh area immediately, because I tend to pronate,
Yep.
sink in. And
Yeah.
so I try to have shoes with a high arch, but just thinking about that, really, I've never done that, and it adjusted my feet.
Yeah. Yeah. Good observation. Yeah. A lot of times they do put us in shoes with an arch, but then our foot loses the ability to create its own arch. So that's why when I have people, if it's safe for you to walk around at home with no shoes on, in the beginning, when I first did this, I could do it like a minute before my feet hurt to high heck. So very small amounts of time, and you just practice it slowly over time. Now I run in barefoot shoes like 5 miles now, but that took years. So yeah. Anybody else?
I just kind of want to echo what you said, Katie. When I started doing sports martial arts without any shoes on,
Right.
I would wake up the next day in just amazing foot pain.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't used to doing that. And it took several months. But then I found that not only did my feet stop hurting, but my ankles were stronger.
Yep.
And my feet were actually more flexible. I mean, it was just amazing. And you forget that everything is connected. Mm-hmm. And how much going barefoot really affects your entire body posture, right, as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. So somebody asked said then the use of minimalist shoes to jog in are good. If you have built up to being able to safely use minimalist shoes, it is good. If not, don't go out and run in minimalist shoes tomorrow. We usually say 10% of your time, if you get a pair of minimalist shoes, we don't have to go all the way minimalist in the beginning first. So an ultra brand shoe is better for that, as opposed to what I wear as a zero shoe. And then 10% of your time throughout the day you wear in the minimalist shoe, and then switch back to your regular. And then you keep going up from there and practice your arches all the time, all day long. You'll get great glutes, thighs, and abs from that too, as well. Okay. So this is one of the things that I would love you all to add into your life, if you can. And when I work with people, you know, one-on-one or in groups and stuff, we do a lot of this, the diet, all the things. And so, you know, and I check form and all that kind of stuff, because I can check and see if your knees are tracking right and all those lovely things. But I did want to give you a few of the things that are super helpful. So this other one is a 90-degree toe bend. I am not going to have you sit like this. I mean, unless you can, but this is just to show you the toe bend actually is at your big toe. And I'll show you right here. So that means up here at the ball of your foot. So from the back, what a lot of people end up doing is this. And that's over to the little toes instead of up on the ball of the big toe. So every time you walk, you need to be able to push through the ball of your big toe and push off your big toe. If you can't, people walk like this. With this straight, their hip will turn out. So most people, when I teach them to do these heel raises, they'll do something that looks like this. See, I'm up on my actual toe instead of this. So if you're seated, and you'll start these seated first, it's just a heel lift. Bring your heel up and try and bend at the ball of the big toe and bring it back down. Go ahead and practice a few of those. If you have shoes on, you probably won't get as much movement. So later you can take your shoes off and try it out. Right here. And then you would do like 10 on one foot, and then you would go to the other foot. So for a lot of people, I coach teen CrossFit or cross country team. Most of them can do this. Most of them cannot bend because they're also in running shoes that have an upturned toe. Most shoes have an upturned toe, which means your toe never has to bend. Again, getting rid of all the movement in your foot, which then decreases any input to your brain and increases fall risk. So if it's here, that's fine. Eventually, you're going to try and get higher and higher. So it's just to the ball of the foot. Okay, remember, it's not off to the side of the little toes. So if you've tried a few of those, let me know how that went. And eventually, if you do like sitting on the ground, sitting the way that I am in that picture would be the full thing. But I would not do that until you've done this seated and then standing at a wall, holding onto a wall, because it takes time to build that up. All right. So just let me know if that made sense. Whoops. All right. And then I'm going to talk to you about sitting. Yay. In the chat or somewhere, can you let me know if anyone has taught you how to properly squat? Okay. We're going to wrap up in a second. Okay. So next month, we'll pick up and start off with squatting to a chair or something. And if you can't squat, that's okay. I'll give you something else to do if you are not mobile. So don't worry about it. There'll be options. But I wanted to just let you see this because I want you to know that you are going to need a chair where your feet can be flat on the ground, or something that you can sit at where your feet are flat on the ground. So if you see in this chair, it's actually too high for me. Every chair is too high for me. So there'll be some options. So you just want to come in something where you can sit down, and we will talk about squatting and how to do that correctly with your nice, lovely arches that you will have practiced for a month and your toe bend, and it will be amazing. So thank you so much for coming today. And I hope you found the stuff interesting and learned something new.
Thank you, Katie. It was very interesting, and I learned new things too. And we're looking forward to hearing more. And if anybody has, questions that you think of, you can jot them down and send them to Sue. I can forward them to Katie so she can answer those at the beginning next time. We're happy to do that, and we'll pick up where we left off next month. And learn more about, again, this is for all of us, keeping our brains healthy no matter what age we are. These are not things that we're talking about that just you should be thinking about if you or your loved one have dementia. But we all need to do things every single day that take care of our brain.
Right.
So we
I
always
teach my
think
teens this stuff. So
yeah, it's important for all of us. So, so thanks for being here, and thank you everybody else for joining us. And we will see you next month at the next Brain Health series. All right, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.